So there is a black hole, one might say, in the human soul. Like the ones that sit at the center of galaxies and that we got a picture of this past month. I imagine you've seen those pictures and can visualize what I'm saying. Well, there's something like that. There's something like that also in our souls as well, a black hole. It sounds harsh to say it, but it's not a bad thing that I'm talking about necessarily. Black holes are powerful beyond measure, massive beyond imagining, and stretch our capacity to understand what exactly they do in this space-time continuum. And the same is true of the black hole of the human soul, that basically keeps us yearning and aching for, we don't always know what, but that it sits there aching is what we know. So, if you've been with us throughout Lent, these past 6 weeks that have led up to Holy Week and now Easter, you'll know that we've done a series on the 7 deadly sins. And each week we've taken a different sin that I've preached on, and we've kind of geared our music around it and that sort of thing, as strange as that might sound. It's been an engaging process in that we have considered the 7 ways that the ancient Christian dwellers wrote about how the human being can become curved in on itself. 7 deadly sins, they're called, that separate us from our true selves, that separate us from one another, that separate us ultimately from God. It's actually this remarkable tool for self-examination developed way back in the 5th century, but remarkably applicable in our efforts to see ourselves more honestly and clearly today, and how our good desires and our good loves can become distorted and disordered if we are not very careful. In fact, even if we are careful, they become disordered and distorted. But the image of the black hole, not only in the universe but also in our souls, is an important one because it's one way of understanding why. Why do we sin? Why do we get off track? Why do we miss the mark at times? Why do we fail of that which we know better? Why do we hurt ourselves and those around us, even those we most care about? Well, one way of understanding it is it's because of this hole which has this massive gravitational pull for what we most need, and what we most need seems most elusive. And the need can grow so big it feels like a pull into oblivion at times. And so what we try to do is stuff it up so it doesn't feel like such a gaping maw in us of emptiness. And the effort to fill it up then leads to greed, to gluttony, to envy, to anger, lust, sloth, vainglory, and pride, and that's 7. And any number of offshooting sins from there. So there's this movie musical that you might have seen called The Greatest Showman. Have you seen that? It is so good. I mean, it got panned by critics, so some of you might not have liked it, but I don't understand you if you didn't. It was so good. It's about the start of the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And yes, it's a bit sappy and saccharine, but it is, and probably a far cry from how it actually happened. But it's beautifully done and stirs the heart and just makes you want to dance and sing and cry. In any case, there's this song in the musical that speaks of the hole in the human soul, and it's called Never Enough. And it's this beautiful, those of you who have seen it can, it's coming to mind right now, I'm sure. Where this beautiful superstar singer is on stage and heart-achingly sings, "All the shine of 1,000 spotlights, all the stars we steal from the night sky will never be enough, never be enough." Something like that. It's a little better than that. Towers of gold are still too little. These hands could hold the world, but it'll never be enough. Never be enough. And then she sings, "Never, never, never enough. Never," on and on as the strings kick in, and it's so beautiful. And she, as she's singing, it builds and kind of rips your heart out and speaks in such anguished tones about the black hole in us that is painfully, achingly true for us human beings, that it seems like there is never quite enough, that it might never be enough. Never, never. And the problem comes, this sin, what we refer to as sin, enters the equation whenever we try to make up the never enough with the things of this world, when we try to fill the black hole, for instance, with material possession and money, as with the deadly sin of greed, or when the gaping hole leads us to desire what other people have and can even lead us to want them to have less, as in the deadly sin of envy. Or our sense of never enough can lead us simply to check out of relationship and refuse to press into the demands of love, as in the sin of sloth, and so on and so forth. And it is a sad thing that we can get so far off in our efforts to fill that emptiness. And I've said throughout this series, and I'll say it again, as an ordained clergy in the Christian church, I apologize on behalf of the church that it has too often wagged its finger, shaming and blaming us awful sinners, instead of with great compassion wrapping us in its arms and saying, acknowledging how terribly afflicted we are by all of this orbiting around the black hole of our souls. So we finally got a picture of a black hole in the universe at the center of the galaxy named M87. And it's a bright ring of gas orbiting the supermassive whole thing. And the black at the center, if you've seen that, the black at the center is not actually the black hole, but a shadow of it, whatever the heck that means. But suffice it to say that we have a picture of it now. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I know there's a BU physicist sitting over there, but while it's a picture of the black hole, and so there's photographic evidence of its existence, it certainly doesn't, in any account, answer all of our questions about black holes, but maybe even opens up more. So the same is true of the black hole in the human soul. For there came a time about 2,000 years ago when something happened in human history that was similarly a snapshot of this hole in the human soul. And for the first time, we caught a glimpse of the shape of it. The shape of the hole in the human soul. So it happened when God, true God from true God, light, true light from true light, love source, condensed itself from ethereal spirit into material being in the form of Jesus Christ. And he became God in human form, human deified in divine form, whole and all. Yes, even he, if he was human, had a black hole at the center of his soul, and all the same yearnings and struggles and anguish to fill that gaping maw with the things of this world, the loves of this life, the ways of this existence, racked him, and at times brought him joy, and at times brought him such deep sorrow. But what he was able to do that no one else could was to conform his life to the emptiness of the whole. His life, you could say, was that bright ring surrounding the whole, or the shadow of the whole. A shining bright ring was his life. But the problem was that the world of humans who cannot cope, who we can barely cope with our own black holes, our black holiness, we just about freaked out when we encountered someone who could live out of that space. And people loved and adored him, and they hated and betrayed him, and in the end, he was executed and crucified. And man, he was all compassion, mercy enfleshed. And even then, at his execution, the phrase from the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," rang on his lips. Full of sorrow and compassion, he said, "They do not know what to do." And they didn't, and we don't, for it never seems enough. But in that moment, there was a shock to the human psyche that would reverberate across the world and down through the centuries. A flashpoint, bright and searing, etched into the human psyche, and it was the shape of the hole in the human soul, and it was his crucified form. Not so much a symbol of state violence and human hard-heartedness, although that was a part of it, but much more importantly, a symbol of God's profound love for humanity in all of its brokenness, in all of its sin and waywardness and suffering. The mathematician, physicist, and Catholic theologian in the 17th century, long before we had a picture of the black hole in the universe, his name was Blaise Pascal, and he spoke of this hole. And he said, quite simply, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each person which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator, made known in Jesus Christ. And how is God made known? It's strange. Strangely enough, God is made known on a cross with arms outstretched. God in crucified form, expressing love and mercy and transforming the pain of the world, not transmitting it back out, but receiving it and transforming it. God in crucified form is the shape of the whole. But then there's just one other hole to mention in this equation that brings us from Good Friday to Easter Sunday morning, where we land this morning. After Jesus was crucified and died, they took him down from the cross, wrapped his body in oils and spices, and brought him to a memorial garden and laid him where? In a tomb, in a hole in the ground. So there is this hole in the human soul, and one of the reasons we have so much trouble orbiting around this hole and why its massive gravitational pull feels so threatening to us is because of this other hole in existence, which you know is the big D word, death. And I think the hole in our soul that only God can feel feels so frighteningly close to death, to the abyss, that we scramble desperately away from it and try to patch over it and pretend like it's not there. But what we recite and what we remember and sing about and celebrate on Easter morning is that Jesus Christ went there, deep into that frightful hole, and came out not only intact, but glorified, transformed, resurrected, making of death a portal not to non-existence and oblivion, but to love and life. What? Death, a portal to love? Death, a portal to life? And then we are freed not to be so fearful of that anymore. Not to live our lives scrambling from the grasps of death. Our space-time continuum ceases to operate there, and it opens up even more questions that it answers, of course. But Jesus Christ, crucified, tomb laid, and resurrected is the image of the hole in the soul and what fills it, which is God's love. Only God's love, which is the greatest power of all. So we do not have to grab in greed or devour in gluttony all we can get because it's already been given. And we do not have to lash out in anger against others when God's love and justice will have the final say. We do not need to check out in despair and hopelessness of sloth when God has already given the end of the story, and it ends, let me tell you, really, really well. We do not need to use others regardless of their well-being for our own pleasure as in lust, because we can come to find deep satisfaction and release in mutual exchanges of love that reflect God, God's self. We do not have to insist on the recognition and affirmation from others as in vanity and vainglory, or grab at what others have as in envy in order to establish ourselves as worthy, because God has already established it, and we are beloved of God. We are not defined. We are not labeled. No matter what the church has said, ultimately it is not that we are sinners, but that we are beloved. That is the Easter pronouncement. And it'll finally be enough. We will still all along have this sense of the never enough, because the hole is there. It's always there. But we can remember and celebrate and bank on the fact that ultimately the never enough will give way to the enough. In the end, it will be enough. What if we could rest in that? What if our actions and our work and our loves could arise out of that guarantee that in the end it will be enough? Amen.